Welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. And this week, Wakanda Forever. Cue the music. Hello there, Capers, and as I said, welcome to Podcapers, the official podcast of A Place to Hang Your Cape. My name's Scott James Merridew, and this is the show where we talk about various geek and nerd-related topics, and I'm joined each week by a very special different guest. I'm joined once again by Archit, Tripathi and Ngwevela, and I mean, I think we're all just in a state of shock right now, as is the rest of the superhero fan community and the Marvel fan community, and just people who enjoyed Chadwick Boseman's work, because 43. He's 43 and dead from colon cancer.
So sudden too. The fact that I think what was really shocking is because he kept it so close to his chest, and so you would just see him in these movies and stuff, and be like, "Yeah, Chadwick, my man, he's killing it right now," and then just out of nowhere they just announced it. And I saw like the push notification on my phone when it happened, and I was like, "There's no way. This has to be some hoax that got trending." So I went and checked like every website I could think of, and it was everywhere. And at that point, I was like, "Oh shit! It actually happened."
That was exactly my thought process as well, because I learned about it through the Place to Hang Your Cape, sort of our internal channel. Someone said Chadwick Boseman is dead, and a lot of us were like, "Really?" We check. Oh, and that's the thing. He played it so close to no one knew about this.
Right.
No one outside of his family.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm not even sure the people at Marvel knew. And the sad thing is, now that it's happened, people are starting to realize how much physical agony that man must have been over this, like a 4-year period.
Yeah, and doing some very physical roles too.
Oh yeah.
And there was this guy who tweeted, like, I interviewed Chadwick Boseman at one point while he's making all these movies, and something he said made so much sense. And he tweeted a little excerpt from the interview, and he said, and the guy was saying, "Okay, so you've bulked up and you slimmed down for these various roles. That must have been pretty intense." And Chadwick just sort of, in the transcript, just sort of sighs and says, "Yeah." And the guy says, "Wow, you've been for a lot, haven't you?" And Chadwick said, "Yeah. One day I'll live to tell about it."
Whoa. I recently saw... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, I was saying he was talking about the cancer then. And yeah.
I recently saw an interview when the Avengers movie came out. Because remember when Endgame came out and like a whole bunch of people died? And we knew this, I mean, even early in the release of the films, because we saw a lot of previews and stuff where the characters like disintegrated or whatever. And so he was doing a red carpet interview where he was being asked, so is there going to be a Black Panther 2 perhaps where where they bring back T'Challa? And he insists in this interview, "I'm dead." I can't give away too many spoilers, but we've all seen certain, clips and previews. "I'm dead." And then the reporter said to him, she's like, "But we're not ready for you to be dead." And he's like, "But I'm dead." And this was at a time when we didn't know anything. Again, all of us were blindsided by these news. And I think that's the part that hurts the most, right? We were given zero preparation or warning, because we were not entitled to it, right? It was his own...
No.
It was his own thing. So I'm not bemoaning that, but we as the public were just like, what? And
1 minute we were living in a world where Chadwick Boseman was alive and well and healthy, and the next we're not.
And not even just alive and well and healthy, but like literally super heroically healthy. Healthier than the average person as far as we were concerned.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about it, Black Panther 1 came, well, that's probably the only one now, but Black Panther came out in 2018. So that was 2 years into his diagnosis. That was 2 years already into his struggle. So he was looking like that, doing all of that at least I would say probably at least a year into it.
Yeah.
He was
And
shooting that, and I saw a tweet too, like after he passed away. While I was scrolling through stuff, I saw a tweet somewhere that actually said that I think somebody had observed that as of now, Black Panther 2 was still on the Marvel websites as being a 2022 release. So they were very much still planning on doing. I mean, I don't know if COVID might have affected the shooting schedules and stuff, but they were very much planning to have this movie made and released by 2022.
Wow.
yeah, and because here's the thing, cancer affects people in different ways, both physically and mentally, and it's it's a just putting it mildly, it's a heck of a thing, and it's just I've lost family members to cancer. I've lost two family members to cancer. My grandmother before I was born, and a few years ago, my aunt, and she lived her last days in a hospice.
Oh
It's
God.
it, it it's so physically debilitating, and it can be so painful. And
Mm.
I just hate the thought of him being, or anyone, to be honest, being in any kind of pain, whether it be from the actual illness itself or indeed the treatment.
And the
But
thing,
it gives me some small bit of comfort that, as far as I'm aware, he was with family when he passed. And let's
Right.
make let's not make no bones about it. The real tragedy here is that, you know, a husband has died, a father has died, a son has died. That not it's not that we've lost a actor that we love, or that a character that we love, although that is sad.
Right.
That's not the big thing here. The big thing is that this man, beyond Black Panther, beyond Chadwick Boseman, the actor, died, and that is unequivocally a tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And
Just
frankly,
to,
I'm not even ready to have the discussion of what does this mean for Marvel and Black Panther. I don't really care about that right at the moment. I mean, his family have called for privacy, and fucking hell, if they're not gonna get it, at least from
right.
us. I mean,
Right.
but
I'm
but
even
there's
if I had,
already people who are being very antagonistic and who are being very disrespectful, and it's
yeah,
been. I mean, the body is still warm, like
Mm-hmm.
figuratively, but people have already started this attack, which also plays into this stigma that a lot of men, particularly young men, and particularly young men of color, face when it comes to things like colon cancer or testicular cancer or prostate cancer specifically. It's one thing if it was like esophageal cancer, but when it's something that is such an intimate part of your body, it's so hard to talk about in public. And now that we found out he's got colon cancer, I read one tweet where a person said that in order to gain fame and money in Hollywood, you have to take part in
Oh my
all of these
God! Yes, I saw this.
homosexual, yeah, that you have to engage in all these homosexual Illuminati rituals, and that was his downfall. That caused his colon cancer. So I mean, the wound is still fresh for so many of the fans, for so many of the family, for so many of his friends and former coworkers who respected and loved him, and people can't even just take a few days before they come up with all of these homophobic and insensitive conspiracy theories.
because some people just have no shame, and the anonymity of the internet lends itself to revealing the darkest side of humanity. But know what? In addition to that, it also reveals the best part of humanity,
Mm,
the outpouring of grief, condolences, and admiration for this
mm,
man has
mm,
been overwhelming. Both people who have worked with him, people who liked his movies.
Mm-hmm.
Marvel released a video on the YouTube channel featuring clips from Black Panther and Avengers and stuff like that, with people who worked with him talking about him and what a powerhouse he was. And it ends with the powerful message: "You will always be our king."
oh
It's
yeah.
and
Wow.
beyond that, I've seen fans like posing Black Panther action figures with figures of Stan Lee,
Mm-hmm.
and
Oh
little text
wow.
underneath saying like Black Panther asking like, "Was I good?" and Stanley saying you were the
Yeah,
best.
the dog and Reaper meme repurpose. Yeah, no, there's been some really beautiful outpourings of grief and tributes that people have paid online. And one thing I saw on Reddit actually recently was some pictures that I don't know exactly when they were taken, but they looked fairly recent. Was him in his full Black Panther costume, visiting sick children in a cancer ward, and still taking the time to spread that joy, even though he was probably very much in the thick of his own struggle by that point.
Because
And,
Chadwick Boseman understood more than anyone that Black Panther meant something
Mm-hmm.
to people.
mm,
When I reviewed Black Panther, I did 2 episodes on Black Panther with Darian Robbins, who's a fantastic guy, and I recommend you check him out and check the episodes out. Um, and then the thing that you know a lot of people had said, but it still was worth saying. And I asked him, like, okay, so what does this mean to you? And he said, as a black man, this means the world to me to have a character like this who is black represented in this way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, everyone was talking about it, not just because it was a great film, although it was on its own merits, fantastic film, but it was important.
Mm-hmm.
He understood that. Ryan Coogler understood that. Everyone who was involved with it understood that, and it's because there was such dignity to Chadwick Boseman's performance because here's the thing. It's very interesting as someone who lives in a monarchy to see Americans act as characters who are either in a monarchy or monarchs themselves.
Mm-hmm.
oh
And
yeah.
it's a very interesting psychology to be a king or a queen or an emperor or whatever, because chances are you have been told from birth that it's your destiny and indeed your duty to lead. You don't have a say in it. And there's a huge legacy, a dynasty stretching behind you, going back hundreds, if not thousands of years. And it's a lifetime of service and sacrifice. At least that's what it kind of means to the royal family here in the UK. I know a lot of people think of them as very, very privileged, and trust me, they fucking are. But there's also a lot of sacrifice. Both Prince William, Prince Harry have served in the armed forces, and they take their position in the royal family very seriously. Harry, of course, has now since left the royal family for reasons which I think are entirely fucking fair, but that's another discussion.
Yeah.
That sort of mentality, that psychology is so difficult, I think, from a British man's standpoint, for an American to do. And yet he did that. Chadwick did that. He had that sort of, he wasn't cocky. He wasn't like the young prince who dashes in to save the day. No, he was, I mean, he had that regal presence from scene one, even before he was king, when he was just
Mm-hmm.
Prince T'Challa, and he could see how the weight of being king of Wakanda and the
Yes.
Black Panther weighed on him, and his
Mm-hmm.
desire to fulfill that responsibility, not just to his family, but to his people. And
Mm,
for an
Yeah.
American to get that is nothing short of fantastic and astounding.
yeah.
Yeah,
Is
definitely.
it?
One thing I will give a lot of credit to the comics, the all of the Black Panther comics spanning back to back in the day, like the 70s or 80s when they started, is that they've always gotten, I think, that sense of responsibility that T'Challa has so well. And so, he definitely had some great material to draw on, but yeah, the performance that he brought to it was I mean, it'll go down, I think, in the history as being, truly a great film in so many different ways.
As well it should do, because it is great and it's important. His position in Marvel and indeed cinema in general, beyond superhero films, is important. He understood that legacy, and beyond, like, the whole, there's a sort of meme aspect to it afterwards, where people, when they saw him on the street, they made the little X arm figure and saying Wakanda forever. But that's because it was important for people. It was more than just oh, he's a cool superhero, although there was that aspect. It was pride,
Yeah.
and
real, genuine, positive pride.
and there was also this breaking of the assumption, because a lot of Hollywood executives are reticent to make films that center people of color and put white people in the periphery and give them minimal roles and sort of minimal appearance or whatever, because there's always been this assumption that if we put people of color in front and center and we make them the majority, the mainstream consumers are not going to show up, right? It'll become just black people are going to show up, and then everybody else, especially when you're coming from a place like Britain or the United States where people of color are a minority. They didn't want to market to a minority because they wanted the biggest consumer base. And this was a testament to the fact that that's not true. Everybody showed up for this.
Yeah.
And most importantly, I think children showed up for it. Kids saw someone that looked like them being a king, a statesman, a superpowered kicker of asses, and a hero, and that's so important.
But even the villain, right? When we talk about Killmonger, because
Oh, so good.
even the villain in this particular narrative was not painted as somebody who was just evil for the sake of evil, right? He was not painted as somebody who was having fun necessarily. I mean, yeah, he turned it into something fun and became his nickname, but the point is, he was a very wounded human being who was motivated by the pain of abandonment, and
Yeah.
that speaks to a lot of issues that young men, particularly young men of color, can relate to. That
Mm-hmm.
sometimes when they feel like their communities have turned their backs on them, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they say in in this quote unquote African proverb that the child
Mm-hmm.
who was rejected by his village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And so he was not necessarily sympathetic, but he was complex enough that you could understand that this was a hurt human being who set
Yeah.
out then to hurt other people. He wasn't an evil person who was just doing this for kicks. So
Yeah.
even the villain, right? Never mind the hero, even the villain is somebody that you can sort of see yourself in and feel like maybe I'm not a bad seed. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm just a hurt person.
Yeah. I always thought that he was basically, at least in the film version of it, it was kind of the Malcolm X to Black Panther's MLK. They
Oh,
both
yeah.
they both had valid viewpoints within the struggle. One was just a lot more extreme and a lot not as easy to condone, but you could understand, like you said, so just now that that you could understand where he's coming from, where his pain comes from, and where that anger comes from.
Mm, exactly.
And sometimes some people take their pain and transform it into positive ways, other people in negative ways. But that doesn't mean that their pain is any less meaningful and should
Mm,
be dismissed.
yeah.
And which brings us to everything that's happening in Wisconsin in Kenosha right now, because this came off the back of the protests and the subsequent shooting by uh, it's it's the most absurd, and yet of course this happened, of course this happened situations, because so uh Jacob Black was shot in the fucking back by an attempted murderer and coward who happened to be wearing a badge. Because if you this is tying to my whole sort of British just something red-blooded thing, but if you shoot a man in the back, you are a fucking coward. I don't care who you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not the dumb thing. It's fucking stupid, and he's now paralyzed. And because of that, there was a huge outpouring of protest in Kenosha, and some people looked at that and said, "Oh dear, that's not good." Not because a man has been shot and paralyzed because of systemic racism and abuse of authority by people who are meant to protect their community. No, no, no. This is bad because someone's building might get damaged, is the
Right?
excuse we're going to use. what actually we want to do is we want to pretend like it's the fucking 1950s or the 1800s or something, and form a posse, go down there and dole out vigilante justice. And are they? And because of that, people died. Because of that, 2 people died, and 1 person, as far as I'm aware, is still severely injured. And this person, so the people who were shot were Joseph Rosenbaum, Guy Grosskreutz, and Anthony Huber. And I'm not going to mention the name of the guy who shot them because, frankly, he does not deserve to have his name mentioned. And he's got a fucking assault rifle and walks straight up to police. And they're like, "Hey, man, how's it going?"
And they let him
he
just
shot
walk
people.
right past.
Let him just walk right fucking past. I mean, there's video evidence of that. And hell, this guy tried to surrender to police. And they were just like, "No, man, we're glad you're here. It's fine." You shot some people? Okay, well, we were going to have to arrest you, but it's okay. We'll just get into these nice little handcuffs and come with us. Oh, mind your head. Don't worry. We'll treat you right. It's not like you're a black man who tried to break up a fight between 2 white women. Him we would have to shoot in the back.
It's really, the fact that he was able to go home, get something to eat, and go to sleep reminds me of, remember when they apprehended Dylan Roof and took him to like Burger King? 'Cause like
I'm terribly
he was
sorry.
like,
I'm really
hungry.
sorry. Remind me, who's Dylan Roof?
He's the
Dylan
one
Roof
who
is a
shot up a
psychotic.
church.
Yeah, he's a psychotic little piece of shit who went to a church in South Carolina, a predominantly black church in South Carolina, and just started shooting the congregation. They captured him alive. Not a shot fired. And they took this little bastard to fucking Burger King on the way over so that he
they
could
got
get
him
a
a
bite
burger
to
and a
eat.
soda. Yeah, and I'm like,
I did not know that. Fucking hell.
Yeah, it's it boggles the mind how people, who and when people were made aware of this, because people talked about this a lot in the United States. So maybe you might have missed that detail because of your separation from the UK, from the US. But people in the United States who watched this happening practically in real time, failed to acknowledge that history keeps repeating itself, and so they keep seeing these things as isolated events, and they don't see it as a larger picture where patterns repeat themselves over and over again. This kid was able to go home and go to sleep in the same way that Dylan Roof was able to go to Burger King to get a burger and a soda. Like, it just keeps fucking happening, and nobody wants to talk about that.
It's literal evidence of the systemic racism that's present. Cause I mean, I don't know how else you could put it. I don't know what more do people need. If you're white, you get treated for the most part
That's what
fine.
people need. People need empathy. People need to magically develop a sense of empathy now as an adult for the first fucking time in their lives.
And unfortunately, a lot of... Okay, so here's the thing. Out of all the people who have commented on the situation, one person particularly stood out for me, and that was Trevor Noah, from the Daily Social Distancing Show, as he's calling it now. And he was just pointing out, and paraphrasing, you don't travel over state lines to defend a building. You do that because you're hoping you get to shoot someone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yeah, this fucking psychopath, for whatever reason, I think we all know the reason, but for whatever reason, wanted to shoot someone. And apparently he and several others went to the sheriff and asked to be deputized. And the sheriff said, "No, that's vigilante justice. I'm not going to do that." They went out and fucking did it anyway. And because that's what they want. They want a situation where they can feel like the heroes by defending the local community against the big bad black men. And that's the mentality. And there's people much more intelligent than I would be could discuss the cultural significance and the psychological reasoning
Birth of a Nation
behind
all
that.
over again.
Oh
Yeah,
God, yeah.
Just want to relive that Birth of a Nation fantasy.
I think when
yeah,
people
that's what it is.
when people have a craving for violence, it's almost like a drug, and you will go to the ends of the world to get that high, you know.
It's
And you might
mob
justify it.
mentality.
You might justify it and say, "Oh, I needed to do this for this reason or that reason." But the truth is, you were going to score, and his score was not heroin; it was violence.
It's
Yeah.
yeah, and sadly, good old friends at Fox News continue their inherently racist and inherently biased uh, party line, particularly Tucker Carlson.
No.
You know, the bulging head vein of anger that detached from someone and became its own man. Uh, Decided, but he blamed the whole thing on the protests and basically said that, oh yeah, of course, someone with an assault rifle is going to march in there and attempt to dole out vigilante justice. What were you expecting? I don't know. How about the police actually do their fucking job and people don't pick up
Mm-hmm.
assault rifles and try to take the law into their own hands? Guy who was watched by sadly millions of people.
Well,
Ah,
Yeah, due
well,
fucking process. That would be nice. Just some due process. And people also, just to go back to Jacob Blake too, which kicked off this incident. A lot of people are like, oh well, he was walking away. He should have complied. He should have just followed the orders, right? I don't know who needs to hear this at this point, but we don't live in the world of Judge Dredd. Police
hmm.
are not judge, jury, and executioner. You can make an
exactly.
And
arrest.
Judge Dredd,
Make an
sorry,
arrest. If you want to stop the guy, make an arrest. Tell him stop. You're under arrest. That's it. But like, don't. What are you? I mean, I just don't understand. Oh, not complying all of a sudden is a call for an execution in the street, just a public execution.
I just want to clarify one point, by the way. When I made the analogy between somebody looking to score, I don't mean to equate somebody with a genuine health issue with
no,
somebody
no,
who
no.
wants to kill. What I am saying is that it goes back to that point of that people who have been hurt then go on to want to hurt, right? People who have been sort
Mm-hmm.
of brought up in a circle where pain, violence, trauma, where disorder, chaos was like their bread and butter in their childhood.
Yeah.
Sometimes they will turn that into something constructive, and sometimes they will turn that into something destructive, and sometimes it's self-destructive or sometimes it's outwardly destructive. So I'm not trying to say that a person with a drug problem is the same as a person who goes out to murder, but I am
No.
saying that a lot of people find very destructive and very harmful ways to try to process their own grief or their own
Mm-hmm.
confusion or their own feelings of helplessness.
Yeah.
And that's perpetuated by incredibly biased news sources like Fox News, Breitbart, all these sorts of things that basically just scream at people, impressionable people. America is under attack from within, and it's by these people, and they're the problem, and you need to deal with them. If not literally saying that, then subvertly saying that. And it it's scary for me because here's the thing. I have a lot of problems with a lot of the media here in the UK, but there is at least an attempt to be non-biased. It doesn't always work, looking at you, the Daily Mail, but when it comes to our television news programs, a lot of the time it tries to be neutral, it tries to be balanced, it tries to be fair. It does not always succeed. In fact, there's one thing I really want to talk about. I'll get to that in a second. But they're you both of you might have seen clips of British newscasters and they talk in very evening. Good evening. Today, a massive explosion happened in the middle of Middlesex. 10,000 people died. Also, the sun shone today. It's the same tone of voice, you know? It good things, bad things, whatever, same tone of voice. But
Yeah.
in America, I see on both sides of the political spectrum, in fairness, people, and I know these are pundits and not necessarily news hosts, but all the same, and I see people talking with such bias and such yes, passion, but also
Yeah.
emotion. And I can't help but feeling this just feels wrong. This is news. It's not meant to be. You're not meant to have your own opinion. Like I know
Yeah,
we have those sort of things over here as
unfortunately.
well. I'm looking at you, Piers Morgan. Another problem.
Oh my god, yeah.
Oh
No,
my
That's the right
squishy
noise.
Hopkins.
People make that noise every time Piers Morgan's name gets mentioned. That's fair.
Ew.
Ugh.
It's written on his birth certificate. Piers Morgan. Ugh.
Piers Morgan, but it's just so. But it's such a culture shock for me as an Englishman to see that sort of thing, particularly when they're allowed to say such hateful things, and that's part of the reason
Mhm.
why they maintain their jobs. Oh, what's his face?
Bill
We'll
O'Reilly.
do it live guy. What was his
Yeah,
name?
Bill O'Reilly.
Bill Riley. How did he keep his job for so long? I don't know.
Oh my
I
god.
really don't
The thing
know.
is that in the UK, you guys still actually have news. I mean, I know there's 24-hour news cycles and stuff happening over there now too, but
Yeah.
you guys still have a respect for the news. In America, we don't really have news anymore. We have entertainment shows about current events.
I
Yeah.
remember this one time there was a governor who was talking about something really important. I don't remember what it was because it was like 6 years ago. But she's sitting there at a local news station, um, and she's talking about something of importance. And the journalist stops her and says, "I'm sorry to stop you, Governor, but we have breaking news. Justin Bieber has just been arrested on a speeding, on a DUI charge in Miami, Florida." This woman is talking about a social issue something about education or something, and she's talking sense. She's saying something sensible, and the person is like, "I'm sorry to interrupt you. Breaking news: Justin Bieber has been caught on a DUI." So
I
in the
remember
United
that day.
States, there's this whole culture where they want to sex up the news. If it's not fun and sexy, like a
Yeah.
like a scandalous celebrity event or something like that, then it's not really important. And which brings me to my concern also about the fact that when you try to report news, even if you try to be unbiased in the United States, the very fact that you have information constantly coming in from, all around the country and all around the world, and you are maybe given freedom in some places that doesn't happen as much anymore, to pick and choose which stories you're going to run because you only have, the top of the news or whatever, right? The very fact that you've prioritized the story about Justin Bieber over the story about education or infrastructure or whatever already shows a bias, right?
Hmm.
No matter how
And
you report it.
it's one of those. It's a very unique socio-political psychological phenomenon, because I mean right now, okay, so the other day in Trafalgar Square there was this protest by a bunch of morons who it happened all across Europe actually, a bunch of morons who were protesting lockdown measures, COVID-19 protocols and all that,
Oh
saying, oh,
God,
we
we
don't want to
exported
wear a
that to
mask.
you. Oh, I'm so
Yes,
sorry.
hey, there's idiots all over the world. I'm not going to blame that for you, trust me. But right after that, and in the wake of everything that's happened in Kenosha, there's also been anti-racism protests taking place in London as well. And I first heard about it on YouTube. A little thing popped up on news feed from the YouTube channel of one of our newspapers, The Independent. And then I did something very, very stupid, probably the stupidest thing I have ever done in my life. I took a little stroll into the comments section.
Oh.
Oh no.
And I don't know if this is part of the course for a lot
Oh
of these
yeah.
news channels, but I mean, every single comment is, even the like to dislike ratio, just in response to people protesting against racism, something that everyone should be able to get behind. And I'm not going to read them out because some of them are just fucking hateful, and most of them are just jokes about Diane Abbott. British in joke. Won't waste your time
Ugh.
with it. Yeah, but it's
Yeah.
One thing I will say, one comment that particularly stood out to me because it makes absolutely no fucking sense. Black Lives Matter equals doing more for right-wing recruitment since Uncle Painter. It's
What?
I don't know. It's so fucking stupid. But here's the thing. A lot of these people, partially again the anonymity of the internet, but it's also because, like I said, the Daily Mail over here and certain things like that, and a lot of, unfortunately, on the internet, especially, a lot of extreme right-wing groups are recruiting online. They're the ones fucking doing the recruiting, not Black Lives Matter. But it's perpetuating this very insular bubble of hatred and backlash when really this should be something that unites us. And there's always going to be some people who don't care or disagree or whatever, but I was just so surprised to see not one of the comments, whether that was my fear or whatever, but then again, it's a comment section. What are they going to do? Blast you? Like, I don't care. And it just ties into something very interesting and that I'm worried is going to happen over here, but there's definitely happened in America. I saw this on Twitter, and it's a quote from something. I don't know what it's from. I just saved a picture of this tweet, and I'm going to read it out in full. And Archit, I know this is going to resonate with you. I'm sure for a lot of our American capers, it's going to resonate. But as an Englishman, I found it so thought-provoking and so terrifying, especially considering what's going on. I'm just going to read it out if you'll indulge me. Americans are, of course, the most thoroughly and passively indoctrinated people on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
They know next to nothing, as a rule, about their own history, or the histories of other nations, or the histories of the various social movements that have risen and fallen in the past. And they certainly know little or nothing of the complexities and contradictions comprised within words like socialism and capitalism. Chiefly, what they have been trained not to know or even suspect is that in many ways they enjoy far fewer freedoms and suffer under a more intrusive centralized state than do the citizens of countries with more vigorous social democratic institutions. This at once the most comic and most tragic aspect of the excitable alarm that talk of social democracy or democratic socialism can elicit on these shores. An enormous number of Americans have been persuaded to believe that they are freer in the abstract than, say, Germans or Danes, precisely because they possess far fewer freedoms in the concrete. They are far more vulnerable to medical and financial crisis, far more likely to receive inadequate health coverage, far more prone to irreparable insolvency, far more unprotected against predatory creditors, far more subject to income inequality, and so forth, while effectively paying more in tax when one figures in federal, state, local, and sales taxes, and then compounds all of these by the expenditures that, in this country, as almost nowhere else, the taxes do not cover. One might think that a people who once rebelled against the mightiest empire on earth on the principle of no taxation without representation would not meekly accept taxation without adequate government services. But we accept what we have become used to, I suppose. Even so, one has to ask, what state apparatus in the free world could be more powerful and tyrannical than one that taxes its citizens while providing no substantial civic benefits in return, solely in order to enrich a piratically overinflated military-industrial complex and to ease the tax burdens of the immensely wealthy?
Mm-hmm.
And that whole thing is... I mean, I think it's true.
Yeah.
I think a lot of Americans have been indoctrinated through the media, through their culture, through education, whatever, about not caring about why the Black Lives Matter movement exists, why people are protesting, why people are angry, and why these things happen in the first place, and indeed that a systemically racist system does in fact exist that perpetuates these things that they don't even believe exists. And it's this... Earlier, Linda, you were saying this isn't going to stop, this is going to keep on happening, and it's going to keep on happening as long as people like Tucker Carlson, Fox News, Breitbart, Donald fucking Trump, and all these people either perpetuate a system of hatred and inequality, or try and pretend like the system of inequality does not exist?
I think I might have addressed this in our previous talk. That it's a classic divide and conquer type of situation, right? Where in the times of slavery, for example, you had
Yeah.
rich land owning white slave owners who had convinced poor uneducated whites that if we abolish slavery, first of all, the economy of the South would collapse irreparably, right? It would collapse past the point of being able to be fixed. And all these Negroes are now going to start taking paying jobs that you used to have before. So they would hire white people, poor whites, to be overseers. They would hire them to be patrolmen who would walk around in the city square, right? They would deputize, they would make them sheriffs, they would give them these badges, give them a gun, and say, listen, I need you to walk around the streets. And if you see a Negro who might look wayward, right? You need to see, if he has emancipation papers, manumission papers, if he has papers to run errands or whatever, because they couldn't read. So when they went to the market, they had to carry papers they couldn't read, you know. So to ensure that black people couldn't falsify a document, they couldn't teach them how to write so that white people can say, yo, where are your papers? And also to catch runaway slaves, right? That was the birth of the police state in the US. It was basically poor people being convinced that the freedom of even further disenfranchised people is going to be detrimental to them, right? And then it just continued. It continued even after the quote unquote emancipation. They now started forming the KKK and other groups
Hmm.
to go and catch those uppity niggers, and if they dared to move into the neighborhood, you had to drive them out. It was a
I
bunch
mean,
of
they
rich
basically
people.
stage a coup d'état on the United States, as I'm aware. I've been trying to educate myself and read up about this, and apparently, because post emancipation, post Civil War, there were black people in Congress, in the Senate, and they
Oh
Yeah.
were
yeah.
killed and dragged out, and mass slaughter on a nationwide scale. And people were either told, "This is how it's going to go now. You better," and follow our line and our way because we don't want these people around. And out of fear of violence, or because they sympathized for whatever reason, a coup was had, and the government was overtly and quietly overthrown.
Hmm.
And that government is still in place today. These systems are still in place today. It's a truly terrifying notion.
This is basically Hydra. Like
Yeah.
the Confederates basically became Hydra. They embedded themselves deep into every facet of government and just kind of seeped their hatred and their rhetoric outwards quietly under the shadows ever since then. And that's the state that we live in now.
And
I mean,
most
there
white
were
people, at least, don't know that.
there were a lot of black communities, for example, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where black
Ah.
people were able to create their own wealth and create their own opportunities. They had all their own
Mm-hmm.
businesses, places of worship, schools, banks, everything.
Black Wall
And the
Street.
minute Exactly. And also what happened in Seneca Village, aka Central Park, where black people again, they formed a community that was thriving, the black businessmen, educated people, mayors, everything. And then, the government said, we can't have this happen. So they evicted everybody, destroyed all the homes and businesses, places of worship and school, and they built a park wherein they put a statue of like of people like Christopher Columbus or whatever, and people like J. Marion Sims, um,
And
and
fucking Balto the dog.
basically, basically
I,
that's
I
what
just,
they
just
do.
and just it's so funny because there's a show out right now. I think it's just finished or whatever, called Central Park. It's an animated musical show Like the opening musical number from the first episode featuring Josh Gad mentions that, and they sort of brush past by singing Dark Chapter. It's and I had no idea what they were talking about until now.
Right.
So,
Mm.
And that's
oh
Yeah.
and
god,
that's recent, right? So even now, the willingness to actually really truly sit down and acknowledge that history, as you demonstrated from that moment, they just kind of say, "Oh yeah, there was this thing. It was a dark chapter. Moving on."
A dark chapter, right? Like everything was just so infinitely bright after that.
That just like
it's
it just kind of reminds me of that Family Guy episode where Brian and Stewie go to Germany and they're taking like a tour, and the tour guide just refuses to talk about the World War II era, and he's like, "What about
Oh,
what happened from like 1931 to 45 or whatever?" And he's like, "Nothing. We went on vacation.
we were on a
Everybody was
break or
gone."
something.
And what about Poland? You guys marched into Poland? No, we didn't. It was a party.
no,
Punch was
you got me.
served.
Oh no, yeah, I don't see him in.
Oh,
What about what now?
What's up?
sorry,
Well,
sorry, we lost you for a second there.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I was just saying it was like they were talking about what about Poland? You guys marched into Poland in this year. It's like, no, we didn't. We were invited there. The punch was served. It was a party.
it's like look at the beer halls.
It's it's this revisionist nature. Because here's the thing: in Germany, actually, they don't do that. There's a lot of things that are illegal in Germany, like you can't display a swastika and you can't do the Nazi salute, otherwise you will go to prison. Like
Mm-hmm.
they do not fuck around with that shit. But here's the thing: isn't it? They don't revise their history. They don't unacknowledge it. I'm sure there's still plenty of work to be done in that regard, and I don't know the full ins and outs of it. But they don't shy away from it.
Yeah, no, over
And
here we
and
have
he's a because
literal
he's
textbooks that say, "Oh, African migrants came from Africa to work in our fields." There's like
but here's
actual textbooks that teach kids history that say this.
The
I've seen that. I thought that was a
concentration.
meme. Is that real?
No, that's real. That stuff is happening today. It's still happening. Or they talk about how
Shit.
happy, if they say they were slaves, it's like, oh, but they were so happy though. They were happy. They were so proud of the work that they did.
They
Like,
used to
what the
sing as
fuck?
they worked.
I saw this news clip. I think it was on Trevor Noah's show of a guy saying like, "Oh no, I think slavery should be taught in schools. Yes, I don't think we should focus on the negative aspects of it. I think we should talk about instead focus on how we as a nation overcame slavery and how it was a positive thing." It's like you do know they had to have a civil war over it,
Yeah,
right?
it's not just like one day they were like, oh guys, this is bad. We should stop this. No, there was like bloody wars fought, and to be honest, even most of the North was not all that innocent in all of this. Like most of these dudes
No.
were still pretty racist, and I mean, yeah, like it wasn't just it was just so like I'm sorry, I just get so mad about it. Like it's just so stupid when
I mean,
people
it
try
is
to
absolutely
argue
stupid,
about
but
that.
but here's the thing: going back to the whole Germany thing, I see now both here actually and in the US, people saying, "Oh, you can't tear down statues because that's erasing history." There were a lot of statues of Hitler and his friends in Germany. There aren't any more. You know why? Because they didn't want people who had suffered under him
Mm-hmm.
to have to walk to school or to work at their homes, passing by statues of some of history's worst monsters.
Yeah, and miraculously, we still know about the history of Hitler. That's kind of crazy, right? There was no statues to teach us.
Yeah,
It's
because
so amazing we overcame that obstacle and still learned
if you
about it.
update your fucking textbooks, there's not really a conversation you have to have. And especially over here, because it's interesting. I can't remember if I've talked about this on the show before, but here's the thing. Um, Winston Churchill was a white supremacist.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Oh
And
yeah.
he saw my country through one of our darkest periods. My grandparents survived the war, I'm sure in part because of him. I'm alive today because of him. But he was a fucking monster. He did horrible, awful things that he did not have to do, that were not just like, oh, it was wartime, that excuse. Like, he did not have to do horrible things equivalent to the Holocaust. Let's be real here. And it's so awful to having a national debt to a man who killed countless people that were entirely innocent. And,
Right.
and beyond like civilian casualties in the war, which will happen and is always tragic, but no, it's such a bizarre thing because because unequivocally it was his leadership that helped get us through the war. That can't be disputed. But he was also a racist bastard.
Something that I find interesting about the United States, and I guess to some extent this is also true in South Africa, but especially in the United States, is the way in which people on the coasts and in the north like to talk about the South, right? As if the South is the only place, as if the South is the hub of racism, right?
Ah,
Because of the Confederate flags and the monuments to Confederate, uh, uh, figures and so on and so forth. But like, I grew up in New York, and we were
Mm-hmm.
constantly told stories about how George Washington had dentures made of wood when he had dentures made from the teeth of enslaved people that he had violently yanked out from their
Mm-hmm.
heads,
Abraham
right?
really?
Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln. Everybody's like, oh, Abraham Lincoln. He freed the slaves. He was like the best guy ever. Yeah, I mean, he did. Yeah, he was part of the Civil War, but he also killed thousands of Native Americans because of the whole Trail of Tears thing. I mean, thousands of lives, culture lost. So, honestly, most of our founding fathers are people who did great things, but then also did some really shitty stuff too.
And going back to that statue of J. Marion Sims in Central Park, this was a man who now is hailed as the father of modern gynecology. This is in New York City, the statue of a man who would tie down young enslaved women as young as 17 years old and perform the most gruesome gynecological surgeries on them without anesthesia. He is the one who perpetuated this notion that, the Negro, or whatever he would say, um, did not have the capacity to feel pain in the same extent that the white can. And
Oh my
so
God, yeah.
that's why Black women to this day
Mm-hmm.
are being left and neglected and abandoned in the public hospital system or even in the private hospital system. When we complain about our pain, we're not taken seriously. When we ask for pain medication, we're told that we're drug seeking. When we say that, we're uncomfortable, we can't breathe, we're told just relax and you can breathe. And it's not even a wealth and a poverty thing. Serena Williams, as wealthy as she is, experienced like a pulmonary embolism days after she gave birth, and she wasn't given the proper treatment as soon as she needed to be, because again of this capacity to, this mythological capacity for us to just endure pain. And this again is a statue in New York City of a man who started a system that is literally still killing Native women, Black women, even Asian women to this day. Indigenous people are dying. Women, people of color are dying still.
And because this is, we talk about the past like it's a ancient Byzantine forgotten era, but the truth is the past is alive and well in the present. What happened then is not just like ripples in a pond. We're still in the pond.
Right.
We haven't left it. We haven't gone to a different body of water. We're still in the pond, and it's becoming stagnant and fetid, and it's got like snakes and shit in it. It's the metaphor is breaking down somewhat, but you take my point. It
No, it's brilliant.
it until we say, okay, look, we got two options: leave the fucking pond and find a nice lake somewhere, or clean up the pond. And the first thing we need to do is identify what's wrong with the pond and how it got to this point, because anything just left unattended will decay and will hurt you. And if you leave a systemically racist government, culture, system, whatever you want to call it, just alone and pretend like it doesn't exist, it's just going to grow and grow and grow and keep on hurting
Mm-hmm.
more and more people.
It's
Oh
And
my
it's like a
god.
gangrenous wound upon this
yeah,
nation, and if to keep ignoring it is to let it fester, and eventually, as gangrenous wounds do, it'll kill you
You
entirely.
know that I found a quote earlier today that I posted about 6 hours ago, so I'm glad I didn't have to scroll through days and days right here. And it basically talks about black liberalism and the black elite, right? When you have people who come out of poverty and they sort of enter economic privilege and a degree of, yes, they still suffer from racism. Racism will never leave you just because you got money. Like I said, even Serena Williams was not safe. But this quote is interesting. It says here, the black elite, also sometimes referred to as the bourgeoisie, are a direct obstacle to black liberation because no matter how good their intentions may be, their class interests will always take precedence over whatever support they have for the movement.
Mm-hmm.
These are the folks who will cheer for quote unquote peaceful marching, but condemn riots and quote unquote looting. They will go for police reform, but never abolition. And they'll use their influence and resources to ensure that reformist goals squash revolutionary goals every single time. They are more of a hindrance than an asset because they have too much investment in maintaining this system. So it's one of those things where, like, you can take a black person out of the ghetto, but unless they also want to invest in a system where the ghetto is is reformed, is built up, is cleaned up, then really what use are they? They're just moving into a lake somewhere and leaving somebody else in that fetid pond.
Mm-hmm.
and it's interesting you bring that up, because I saw another tweet the other day, or I think it was my Facebook post, of Barack Obama saying, condemning all the violence that happened, as in that have been perpetuated against the protesters, the shooting, and the police response to it. And someone just pointed out saying, under your administration, you
Mm-hmm.
armed and militarized the police. Like, sorry, but this is kind of on you as well.
Mm,
And
mm.
as much as I like Barack Obama, to
Yeah,
be perfectly honest with you, they're not wrong.
yeah, it's the same thing. I mean, it's kind of what we were talking about earlier, where there's plenty of racism happening in the North too. It's the same thing with on the blue side of the spectrum, on the Democrat side or the Republican side. It's all still just happening. It's a lot of just being out of touch with what's actually going on with people
And
and
he
just perpetuating the same systems of inequality and violence.
And he also expanded the war on terror,
Yeah.
which means that brown and black people in places like North Africa, West Asia, or what we call the Middle East, and South Asia suffered as well. So there were a lot of people, black and brown people, who suffered because he was still serving a predominantly white ruling elitist class,
Yeah.
right?
It,
So it wasn't just a George Bush or a Donald Trump thing about these rich white guys who, grew up with daddy's money. You also have a kid who grew up fairly middle class and brown, and he's still ascended to a position where he is protecting white capitalist power over black working class people.
Because the president, all presidents, have chiefly served those interests. That's the system as it was designed. That's what it's designed to perpetuate. So you could go in with the best of intentions, but that's who you're serving. And that doesn't mean that it's impossible for you to do anything that would positively impact the black community or other ethnic minority communities. But that's not what that office is there for. And until you
Mm,
make it something that serves all the people, and fix and retool, and defund and reform, or even abolish the system that actively works against that, nothing is going to change. But
Yeah.
here's the thing is though, we can still find icons to look up to and people that can be an inspiration, much like Black Panther, that can inspire people to be positive. And here's the thing, as we're learning more and more, you don't have to be a police officer to fix the community. You don't have to be a politician or a statesman to actively work in the community and make a change. You don't even have to be a protester, although that is definitely a good thing to be. And it's so I don't want to use the word weird, but it's so outside of my world. Again, this is my white privilege showing, because I've never really felt like I was part of a white community. But that's because I'm white and I never had to think about something like that. And so this is why representation in the media is so important. And so just for the rest of this episode, we're going to talk about this when it comes to film, because we talked about in comics some fantastic black superheroes, but I just want to run down the list. Unfortunately, it's not that long a list of some of the best examples of black superheroes in film. And it really kicks off in the late 90s, in 1997 specifically, because there were two movies featuring black lead characters in that year. Both of them starting with the letter S, Spawn and Steel.
Spawn.
I vaguely remember Spawn. I think I saw that.
I have had the great pleasure of seeing Spawn all the way through, and I've read some of the comics. And the comics, I'm not a big fan of early Image comics in general, but Spawn's a good idea, and he's had a sort of enduring legacy beyond that. But Spawn the movie is shit.
Like, I'm Googling this right now.
It's Michael Jai White as Al Simmons, who is a hitman who is killed and betrayed by his former boss and is immediately sent to hell, where he is confronted by a giant Muppet hyena demon who looks some of the worst CGI you'll ever see. And it's just like, hey, I want you to lead my undead army to take over the world. And Al is like, okay.
Holy
It's
shit.
like,
The description here is they say a clown from hell. Hold on a second.
yeah.
Let me this
Yeah, it's a
like
weird
first of
movie.
all, when you start with the sentence that a clown from hell allows a badly scarred man to return to Earth on a mission to conquer the world, like that's the first sentence, and I'm instantly like, what?
Holy shit,
The
this is the
clown in
greatest movie ever.
The clown in question is played by John Leguizamo of Ice Age fame.
Oh god, that's who that was. Yeah.
Shit, son.
It's a delightful, bizarre film, also featuring Martin Sheen. I want to point out, just
Oh god.
don't know why he's in it, but he's in it. And here's the thing: in the comics, Spawn being black was sort of incidental. It only really came up a few times when he uses his new undead powers to create a disguise for himself, because he's still like burned, because that's how he died. And his human-looking disguise is a white man. And he's just like, wait, what? But I'm a black man. Why do I look this way? And it's just like, well, hell, you can't look like yourself because, your family's there. Oh, by the way, your family have moved on and your wife has married someone else. Just so you know. But then but he spends most of the time in the black and white, long red cape suit made of like necromantic energy or something. And it's not a good film. I hear they're going to reboot it anytime soon because Spawn is a big, huge deal, and that's fine. But it doesn't compare to the sheer powerhouse that is Steel, who is played by Shaquille O'Neal.
Yeah, I don't think I saw
Shaquille
that one
O'Neal?
either.
Steel.
Shack Attack himself
Shaq.
plays Steel, based on a DC character called John Henry Irons, who sort of popped up trying to imitates the wrong word, but he was sort of inspired by Superman. And this is John Henry Irons in this movie is a former member of the military who is betrayed by the guy who played Bender from The Breakfast Club.
Okay.
And he
Good
teams up
times.
with Richard Roundtree and his friend who's in a wheelchair to fight crime using a powered armored suit with a giant hammer. It's
Okay.
and he's got a grandmother whose running plotline in the movie is that she's trying to make the perfect souffle. It's a heck of a movie.
This reminds me again of another Key and Peele sketch where they were like it was Stanley in
Oh yes,
in a meeting with a bunch
Jordan
of
Peele plays
writers,
Stanley, giving a bunch of like kind of outdated superhero ideas based
and
on his own life.
like far fetched, like really far fetched and kind of crazy. And then they're like, "No, bruh," and at some point they just sort of have to entertain him, like they just have to go with it.
Funny
This is
thing
what
about that
this
is
is
Stanley
like.
can actually come up with pretty good character ideas up until the end. He was still a good, very creative guy. But like, this is real. This is based on a DC character who, as far as I'm aware, is quite different from his movie counterpart. And you might be wondering, can Shaquille O'Neal act in this movie? Because Michael Jai White is a good actor, and he does act in that movie. It's not a great performance, but then it's not a great character. But can Shaquille O'Neal act? No, he cannot. And it's
Wasn't he also in Shazam?
yeah. No, Kazam. You're thinking of
Ka- Ka-
Kazam.
oh, my bad, Kazam. Because
Fucking
people,
hell, do we have to bring up Sinbad again? Because, no. Okay. So there's this character from DC called Shazam, formerly known as Captain Marvel. There is the movie Kazam, where Shaquille O'Neal plays a genie and grants a little boy wishes, and it's crap. And there was supposedly a movie called Shazam featuring Sinbad, the popular American comic entertainer, who was also a genie, but that movie doesn't exist and has never existed.
oh my
So
God. It's what they call the Mandela effect, where a group of people, either like a small group or huge, like a whole country or the whole world or whatever, seem to remember something that never happened.
it's the most bizarre mass psychosis the world has ever seen. And apparently, apparently in the recent DC fandom, which we actually left out of in our review because we had to talk about Project Power, when they were doing like a panel for the next Shazam movie, they brought on Sinbad. So maybe Sinbad's going to be in the next Shazam movie. The power of memes, ladies and gentlemen, it's a frightening thing.
It
And so
is.
this was the point I'm trying to make is these two movies in that year, it was not a great year for representation for black superheroes. Both of these movies were cheesy, corny, crap, didn't have great effects, and only real value was in laughing at them. Which, don't get me wrong, you can get a lot of value out of that, particularly Steel. It's the feel-good movie of 1997.
Of
But
course.
here's the thing. It was followed the next year, in 1998, by Blade.
Yes.
Mm.
And what a game changer that was.
That one I did
Not
see.
only... Because, I mean, I was never particularly into Blade as a character. I just never read that much of him. And he's sort of... Because, here's the thing. I watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's my Vampire Slayer. That's my Vampire Hunter. That's my go-to. And so inevitably Blade was compared by me to Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And here's the thing. Buffy the Vampire Slayer has a personality.
I was never actually
Blade!
big on Buffy. Sorry, I'm not-
Shame on you, Lindy.
I know, and especially it was like a big cult classic among queer women because they were always trying to ship like different female characters. So I should have been on board with that because everybody was always trying to get the girls to hook up, which I guess, but it was always the lesbians. It was never really the men. Or as far as I know, I always just my female friends were always writing fan fiction.
I think
When
there was a lot of homoeroticism between Spike and Angel, but
oh
that was mainly
really?
subtext. Well, it was especially in the last season of Angel, where they had a lot more screen time than they had previously. There was a lot of
Oh,
animosity between them, and a lot of people interpreted that a certain way. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but I think they just sort of rolled with it. I don't think either of those actors, like David Boreanaz or James Masters, really care. So that was kind of interesting. But getting back to Blade for a
sorry.
second. No, it's okay. I could talk about Buffy all day, believe me. Blade, because I mean, Blade was a big thing, not just for black representation in the movies. Because here's the thing: Blade started off in the comics as in the 1970s, and his first appearance is markedly different from the one we know now. He was wearing like green goggles, a green jacket, and a bunch of like stakes tied around his chest. Had an afro and talked jive.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah, it's. Can you tell he
That's
was written
bad.
by two white men?
Yeah, yeah.
It was very much of the times, Luke Cage, Power Man sort of era, to get the idea. And but then as things came on, I think around the 90s, the early 90s actually, before this movie came out, he underwent a very radical change. He started wearing the black leather, he got a more sensible haircut, and ditched the green goggle glasses for some black shades and carried a katana now. And so suddenly Blade was cool. And particularly in the 90s, Marvel horror was really kicking off. Ghost Rider was in a bit of a lull, but it gave way to this thing called Midnight Suns, which is like Damon Hellstrom, the son of Satan, Blade, Morbius, the living vampire. This stuff was really starting to become quite cool. Partially, I guess, because of things like Buffy and that sort of thing. Horror was sort of becoming very much mainstream. And so Blade coming out when it did, the movie, was perfect timing because even though I've never found the character of Blade very appealing, one thing we can all agree on, Wesley Snipes is fucking cool.
Yeah.
It is.
I mean, he doesn't
Yeah.
pay his taxes, but he's cool.
Which is even cooler, though.
Yeah.
Sticking it to the man.
Some people might say that makes him even cooler. Street cred gives him street cred.
He
But
fought the law, but the law won.
Oh, it's oh god, and so the movie. I mean, it's not really about Blade. It's just a vehicle to show Wesley Snipes kicking vampire ass, and frankly, that's all we really need. And it does actually go into his pain because he was born. He's a day walker. He is a vampire, but he can walk in the sun, and he doesn't need blood, except, well, in the comics he doesn't need blood. In the movie they have him take a serum instead of blood that causes him severe physical pain, but he'd rather take that than feast on blood. And that's very interesting. But what's even more interesting is the fact that this is a man whose mother was bitten by a vampire while he was still in her womb, and that's why he is what he is. And then it turns
oh,
out that his mum became a vampire and shacked up with the guy who bit her in the first place,
oh God.
who's a white guy, possibly the whitest guy in the world, and he's the main villain of the movie. And it would take a far smarter man than me to fully analyze and break down the full meaning of that. I just all I know is that scene where he grabs the sunglasses out from midair, fights him with a sword. They have a big sword fight, kills him, and then says, "Some motherfuckers are always trying to ice skate uphill." Cinematic
Wow.
legend, movie Hall of Fame,
Wow.
right there. It's just it's a in that aspect, it's very very cool. Blade didn't really get interesting in the movies until Blade 2, and we'll get to that later. And there's a bit of a lull. There's a character, Mystery Men, that's black, but there's not really much to talk about there because I'm trying to stay away from like the comedy aspect of it. But the next big character was in the year 2000 with Storm in the X-Men.
Ah, yes.
where Halle Berry wears a terrible wig and has an even worse accent.
I don't remember the accent, but I definitely remember the hair.
They ditched the accent in the sequels, which did Halle Berry a world of favors. But here's the thing: the character improved, I thought, as the films went on, but she was nothing like the character in the comics, and that always kind of disappointed me because the character in the comics was very much like how we've been talking about Chadwick Boseman and Black Panther. She was regal and commanding, but also caring and nurturing and supportive, but also such a badass. She challenged Cyclops for the lead role of the X-Men and won. She was the lead of the X-Men for a while, and she did it whilst rocking a mohawk and a black leather jacket.
Someone that I found interesting, or at least a friend of mine who developed a sort of obsession with this particular character, was not necessarily at the forefront of the story, but I have a friend who really took to Morpheus from The Matrix because even though he wasn't necessarily a superhero, he was, he was a mentor who was meant to protect and guide the person who would be the one, right? So
and he didn't die.
Exactly. He didn't die in the first 15 minutes. Um, so even though he's not necessarily a comic book hero, not that I'm aware of.
I think he emerges into the genre of superhero. I think the Matrix is sort of like this whole other thing onto itself, spanning different genres. But yeah, I'd say Morpheus counts for that, and that is a very good point to have that mentor figure. And also interesting, he's a black man who's mentoring a whatever race Keanu Reeves is. I don't know, and I don't care, and I just appreciate Keanu Reeves for the singular, unique individual that he is.
Yes,
but that's kind of rare. Then it's become more frequent, less so, and in my opinion, it's never been done right since. Maybe you can point out a few exceptions, I don't know. But it is interesting, but also he was a force of nature unto himself, not just because of his powers, but his beliefs, his ideals. He truly believed that he was the one. And here's the thing, I also felt like in that first movie, that's fully explored. But here's what I wanted. And this is just me. I don't expect anyone else to agree with me on this one. It's just my own small opinion. I wanted to see a slightly darker Morpheus later on. Because later on in the movies, there's sort of a peace, a truce between the machines and humanity. And I wanted the one dissenting opinion to that to be Morpheus, someone who understandably has become so, like, his entire life he's been fighting against the machines. They tortured him, they've taken away everything he knows, possibly everything he loved. And because honestly, there's a lot we don't know about Morpheus with regards to his past.
Right.
Yeah.
But he is the epitome of what could have been a radical, in the worst sense of the word. And I kind of wanted him and Neo to maybe reach a difference. Like Neo is trying to bridge the gap and bring everyone peace, but Morpheus wants to continue the fighting. And hopefully he brings Morpheus around, and Morpheus is like, okay, you're the one. I trust you. But the problem is, in the rest of those movies, he sort of becomes a background character. He doesn't really do that much.
Yeah. No, that's why. Yeah, I agree with you. I wish
Yeah.
that they had sort of fleshed him out a little bit more and given him a little bit more dimension in the other movies. But like I said, when the first when the first films came out, when the first film came out, this friend of mine who is half Asian and half African developed an obsession not with Neo but with Morpheus, and I think that he wasn't the only person of color who felt that way. And even what's her name, like I took a real liking to Trinity because she was a woman who fought, and I grew up watching like Xena.
Oh yeah, Xena.
Yeah,
God.
I grew up
Carry me in your big,
watching.
strong lesbian arms, Xena.
Like I'm telling you, I love that stuff. I love all that sapphic content. But so to see
I
a
love,
woman,
the
because we're
intro
talking
to
so much
Xena
about
Warrior Princess where it talks about the power, the passion.
Oh God, yes.
Her
You know,
courage will save
that
the world.
that is exactly my cup of tea.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, so because we've been talking a lot about race, and I feel we're not also talking enough about gender.
Hmm.
Um, and
Well,
I mean, you mentioned
this is
form.
because, in addition to being horrifically racist, the Hollywood industry is horrifically sexist,
Yep.
Exactly.
especially when it comes to superheroes. That's that famous Marvel memo email that got leaked, talking about how these crusty old Marvel execs were talking about, oh, you can't have female superheroes because they've tried female superheroes before and they've all bombed. Well, motherfucker, maybe you should have put more effort into those movies and they might have been good. But
Exactly.
Did you
Which
ask him
goes back,
to write those movies, by the way?
right? I mean, or direct or
Or
produce
direct,
them.
produce? Yeah, just to have a female perspective on what this female superhero should look and sound like. Maybe might be nice.
Which
Who
also
knows?
reinforces that thing that I was saying before about how a bunch of these executives didn't want to make movies about people of color because they thought it was going to be a niche market, right? So they didn't want to produce anything of substance for women. Even when they did, it was very clearly written by men. So even women were kind of like, eh.
which brings
So
us
yeah.
nicely to Catwoman.
Oh yes. This one.
Poor
Uh,
Halle
I was
Berry. She
I was
tries hard.
talking
She's not a
to
bad actor,
I was
but
talking to somebody about this one, and I was like, well, no, for me it was I had a problem more with the I had a problem more with the Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman than with the Halle Berry because she wore this weird vinyl outfit that had been stitched together from like junk, spare junk. And then she like wielded this whip like she was a freaking dominatrix. But it was like the way that she wielded the whip to me didn't seem like she was a fighter. It just seemed like she was a dominatrix in a dungeon. It was just there was I don't know just the whole setup to me was so strange and very theatrical.
see, Lindy, what you're trying to do now is you're trying to analyze the inner workings of the mind of Tim Burton, and that's a very dangerous thing to do.
That is a dangerous place to go.
Also,
And
I got to say that Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman thing that worked for me.
Yeah, a
I
lot of
was
guys are turned
I
on.
was into that.
we don't kink shame here on Podcapers. Your disgusting
Exactly.
fetishes are your own business. But no, but
Everybody loves a good dominatrix from time to time.
yeah, I'm from Britain. Trust me, we're all complete sluts. But it, oh god, but going back to the 2004 Catwoman, because I mean that movie I find just intolerable on a number of levels. I could do a whole episode talking about all the major problems with that movie,
Ooh.
but but God, it's a great example because that again, written directed by men. It's a great example about how not to do it. With regards to race, I don't know because I'm chock full of privilege. But in terms of gender, it's like, okay. So the main villain, who is she? Oh, she runs a cosmetics company, a makeup company, because that's what women like, right? Makeup. And also, he doesn't have a lot of great things to say about cats as well. I'm not a cat fan, but it like it's annoying because there's all the weird sexist choices they make. It's also it's just a terrible representation of a pretty cool female villain slash anti-heroine. Catwoman from the comics is awesome, and a lot of times in the media she's been portrayed quite well. In this movie, it was just a mess. But you know what? Halle Berry fucking owned it. Turned up at the Razzies to accept her award for it.
Nice.
Oh no, she got a
Power move.
Razzie. No.
Gotta lean into it. Gotta lean into it.
Exactly.
Like,
I heard Tom Green like unrolled a red carpet for himself.
yes.
Oh God.
Oh god, but it's so weird though that should happen to a female comic book character that's well established and has a very well defined personality. But the same year we get a pretty good, if not slightly minor, black superhero that is not based on anything, but is still regarded to this day as being pretty awesome. Frozone from The Incredibles.
Oh shit!
From The
Yeah, he would
Incredibles.
count. Yeah.
Oh.
I never think about. I never go to the Frozone when I think about black superheroes. But you're totally right, 100%.
I'm,
Played by
I mean,
the one and only Samuel L. Jackson too. I mean, how can we? I feel bad for
I,
forgetting.
because here's the thing, let's be honest, it's not The Incredibles and Frozone, it's The Incredibles, they're the focus, so I don't blame anyone
Yeah, but I
for...
mean, the Frozone moments were so good though. They like
I,
made the movie for me. Every time he came, he stole the show for me. Every time he showed up, I was like, yes, more Frozone.
where is my super suit?
I never saw any of the Incredibles movies, but that sounds interesting.
Oh, dude, you gotta see them. They're,
I find
do
it
it
so...
for Sam. Do it for Samuel L. Jackson.
Because here's the thing, Catwoman is a crap movie and The Incredibles is a good movie, but I find it so perplexing that these Hollywood writers were able to get one black superhero who is a minor character and a man very well, in all fairness, nothing against Frozone or Sam Jackson, but are unable to write a main female black superhero character who's based on years and years of comics. I find that such remarkable ineptitude that it sort of boggles my mind. And you might think, okay, so maybe if a superhero isn't based on anything, they just gives you more room to experiment or tinker, and it means you can do things much, much better. 2008's Hancock sort of belies that argument.
Oh shit.
Here's the thing. I don't think Hancock is actually that bad. I don't think it's very good though. And a lot of what makes it work is Will Smith. And a lot of what makes it doesn't work is Will Smith. It's a very bizarre dichotomy, and it's an interesting premise. It's a superhero that has no interest in being a superhero. He's just kind of a bum with superpowers. But then it swiftly becomes the generic standard superhero movie with no real identity of its own. It left its identity behind. And I find it a very difficult movie to think about, to be perfectly honest, because it's such a unique blend of competency and incompetency, humor and satire, and terrible writing and playing it straight. And I don't know. The great thing about I say the great thing. A thing about Will Smith is after he got past a few of his earlier roles, he sort of... There's this horrible thing that Hollywood does where it tries to...
Where you play yourself, basically, in
No,
every
not exactly.
movie.
Not exactly. I'm just trying to phrase this in the right possible way. It tries to make you forget that an actor is black. I don't know if anyone has sort of... This is just like my sort of thing. And this is not a criticism against Will Smith or any of these other actors, but it's like, remember, we're talking about Key and Peele earlier. Remember a few years ago, SNL did a sketch based around when Beyonce released
Lemonade.
And it's just basically white people freaking out of the fact that they are reminded of the fact that Beyonce is black, whilst all of their black friends are just like, what? She's always been black. What's wrong with you? And it's framed like a disaster movie trailer. And it's very funny, but I think that's something that Hollywood does for both good and ill. So a good example of that, a positive example of that is, I've talked about this before, Roland Emmerich, when he was making Independence Day, wanted Will Smith for that role. He just said, this is the guy I have in mind, he's perfect for the role. And the studio was just like, oh no, you can't have him, he's black. Like Ron Lemmer faced a lot of racism over his decision to cast Will Smith, which he found completely bizarre. And eventually they got Will Smith, and it was awesome. It was a stupid movie, but it was an awesome movie. And since then, Hollywood just like completely accepted Will Smith for any role, but not because he's black or because of his strength as an actor, which is very, very potent. It's because he's Will Smith. It's the Will Smith brand. It's going to what you were saying earlier, Archit, this idea of branding and how we can market things, and it they can market Will Smith, but they don't want to market a black male character. So they focus on the Will Smith aspect, just that name, just him. And there's something to be said, a positive thing for being ethnically blind, being racially blind, and just sort of looking past that. Indeed, there's lots of times when you should do that. But there's lots of times equally when you shouldn't, when it's important to focus on, important to recognize, and important to respect. And Hollywood rarely, if ever, wants to do that.
I think there's a problem though where people swing between extremes in that regard.
Yeah.
Where, right, you do have a black character and they don't want to address that because they don't want to remind us as the audience that this person is, is black. Or they go to a crazy extreme where, again, white people will write a character who dresses in very stereotypically hood or ghetto or whatever, and he speaks in jive, and they want to focus on is the fact that he's black, and they don't make him a fully layered human being. So you go from this extreme, it's like, forget about the fact that he's black, to the other end of it, where it's like, forget that he's a person, let's only focus on that he's black.
It's it's the height of hypocrisy, and I think there has been a bit of pushback on that recently, but not in terms of like main characters, with a few obvious exceptions, because after that, all the black superheroes we saw in films were side characters. Nick Fury, again played by Samuel L. Jackson, he's not a superhero, but he's in a superhero movie, but he's always been kind of the side character. Okay, fine. Uh, in X-Men Origins Wolverine, Will.i.am plays this teleporting guy, gets killed like halfway through the movie, and he's just sort of just there. Not a very interesting character. Slightly more interesting is War Machine, played by Don Cheadle from Iron Man 2 onwards. And he is a much more well-developed character and a very interesting relationship with Tony Stark. But again, he's not the main character. And then it brings us to someone I really want to talk about, because this character makes me fucking angry to my core. You guys watched X-Men First Class?
I haven't.
Yeah,
Okay,
I did a while ago, yeah.
So there's this character in that movie and in the comics, a mutant going by the name of Darwin. Now, in the comics, he's Latino. His name's Armando Munoz. I don't know how you pronounce it. And in the movie, he's black, played by this actor whose name escapes me, but it's quite good and has been in lots of things. And his power in the comics and in the movie is hyper-fast adaptation, meaning his body instinctually, without him having to think about it, indeed he has no control over it, responds to danger. So if he puts his hand in an open flame, it immediately becomes like impervious to flame and he feels no pain. If he goes underwater, he immediately sprouts gills. It's a very creative and unique power, and it's explored fully in the comics. Darwin in the comics is a fucking fascinating character. This is a character that in my favorite comic run of all time, written by Peter David, X Factor, aka X Factor Investigations, he stares into the face of the Norse god of death, Hela, and he survives, even though that's supposed to kill you. And he becomes, because of that, he adapts and becomes like this living god of death. It's a very interesting journey for him as a character. But they have that same power in the movie. They establish the fact that he can't be killed because of his powers. Guess who the first person to be killed in the movie is?
Oh my god. Seriously?
it was quite a bit of contention. To kill off this character that wasn't dead in the comics. I mean, I guess it's a movie, so you can play around with it, but also the only person of color to get killed in the movie, and indeed, I think he's the only person outside of the main bad guy to be killed. It's at least that I can remember. It's actually no, that's not true. A bunch of people get killed in the movie. That was stupid. I was remembering it properly. But he's the only main character outside of the bad guy to get killed, and it's not just the fact that it's entirely the fact that he's black, because the movie found a way to kill the unkillable black man.
Wow, like my jaw is still on the floor. So let me just pick
So
that up.
how did they kill him?
They, like the main bad guy, Sebastian Shaw, who is not at all like he is in the comics as well, but that's a separate thing. Like his power is like he absorbs kinetic energy and transfers that into like energy. So he like absorbs a bunch of energy and he like manifests that in like a little ball of energy, forcibly opens Darwin's mouth and pops it in like it's a fucking lifesaver. And then you see Darwin's body try to adapt to it, and then he sort of grimaces and then explodes
Oh no.
right in front
Shit.
of,
What?
and that's like the big thing. That's like, oh, this is the lowest point for the fledgling X-Men. Now that Darwin's dead, we're so scared. Some of us are even so scared that we're going to join the bad guy, including another person of color played by Zoe Kravitz. It's 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 all manner of wrong, and it's like it's bad enough. The only main character that you kill off is a black man. It's also a character that, based on the powers that you presented, movie like this,
Is
we're not just taking
unkillable.
this from the comics. It's the movie's version of the powers
Yeah.
who can't be killed. It's so stupid. There's not really other ways. I mean, the people have gone online and in video essays and dissected it far better than I ever could. But even watching it, I was the first time in 2011. I was just like, really? It's the only, I think, with the exception of January Jones's performance, truly bad part of that movie. And I do like that movie, but that's just inexcusable.
It's so weird because the fact that his power is adaptability does ring true to real life. And I think that they could have found so many ways in that film to explore that, because when you were explaining to me that, when he puts his hand in a fire, he becomes impervious to burns. When he is underwater, he develops skills. I mean, that's essentially what people of color do every day, not in the literal sense, but it's like the ultimate form of code switching, right?
Yeah.
It's the ultimate form of adapting to your environment so that you can survive in it, so that you can make money in it, so that you can be taken seriously in it. You know, it's so I really think that that kind of a power is so reflect, and then the fact that they just threw that away is so like it's kind of hurtful, to be honest.
It's especially considering, because I'm looking at it right now, because I only knew the character from X Factor and a few other things, but his powers manifested at birth, and because of that, apparently his mother hated him for it, and he was kidnapped or taken or given up to a bunch of scientists who experimented on him at birth. And it turns out I was slightly wrong when I said earlier that he was Latino. He's actually Afro-Hispanic,
Uh-huh.
and so it brings up all manner, as you say, of real-world allegories, and it's it's so annoying because he's a truly fascinating character. I mean, a lot of those smaller X-Men characters, you could make whole movies just about them without any
Right.
other X-Men characters, and he deserved
Mm.
so much better. And it's nothing against the actor playing him, like I said, but it was truly a misstep, I think. And after that, we got yet more side characters. Heimdall in Thor, cool character, but not much to him. Bishop in X-Men, who was so underutilized. Bishop is a truly fascinating character in the comics. He grew up in an apocalyptic version of our world where mutants are not just second class citizens, but equivalent to Jews under Nazi Germany.
Mm.
And he travels back in time to try and prevent that future, leading him to extreme after extreme in defense of a better future and his family. He's a very interesting man. And we don't really get. And then we get Falcon, aka Sam Wilson, Pepper Anthony Mackie in Captain America: The Winter Soldier, and I was very interested to see how they're going to handle Falcon, because in the comics, Falcon has not always been handled great. Really terrible. He's not always been handled that great. Is like Captain America gets the classic Star Spangled shield and costume and the wingtips, a little silly, but still kind of dignified. And he gets like the white and red circus before outfit with the open chest and the little wings and a pet falcon. I think that's the most minor issues that he's faced. And he's Captain America's sidekick. But then this movie comes along and he's his own character. He's gonna be the next Captain America based on the ending of Endgame. And Anthony Mackie, I just thought, brought something unique to that role, something interesting to the point where he's popped up in several movies outside of Captain America. He's become the character in his own right, to the point where I don't even feel comfortable calling him a side character. He's an Avenger now. He's maybe not one of the bigger Avengers that we focus on, but he is an Avenger that we truly care about. And I think that's an important stepping stone that maybe led to the creators of another movie taking an even further step that unfortunately was countered by a lot of backlash, which was totally and completely unnecessary. And I was talking about the decision to cast Michael B. Jordan as Johnny Storm in Fan 4 Stick. Because in the comics, Johnny Storm is the Human Torch, is very, very white and blonde-haired and blue-eyed.
Right. He's Sue Storm's brother.
Yeah, he's Sue Storm's brother. And in this movie, Sue Storm is blonde-haired and blue-eyed, but Johnny is not.
And how did they explain that? Because I think they still had him like be her brother or something, but he was adopted.
She was adopted by. I think that's, and it's. Here's the thing: the decision to cast him as Johnny Storm was a big growing moment for me, because when this happened, when I heard about this was a few years before the release, and I was of the opinion that was not a good thing. I told myself it was nothing against the actor. It was nothing against black superheroes, but he was white in the comics, so he should be white in the movie. And then someone pointed out to me a lot of things that I say on the show now about representation, about how important that is, and about how the stuff I was talking about doesn't really matter. And I spent a lot of time really reflecting and thinking and listening to other people, probably for the first time in regards to that sort of thing. I really actually listened to it. And I realized that I had privilege, probably for the first time, actually. That was the moment where I really realized, oh shit, I am privileged. And
yeah, because if you stop and think about it, he was originally white, right? How many superheroes were also originally white? Like, if you look around, even to this day, it's probably 85-90% of them are still white guys, right?
And that's not even talking about whitewashing and how so many black characters are given that reverse treatment. And it was the point where Scott James Merridew grew up, basically, regards to this sort of thing. And it was such a shame that I did grow as a person and became much more aware of the world I live in and how it works and how black people are treated, both in real life and in the media, that after all that, the movie was shit on toast.
Damn it, I wasted all this growth.
Yeah,
Oh my god.
no, it's not. It wasn't wasted. It
No,
wasn't
of course
wasted.
not. But
But
I get the frustration. Like you wished after all that it was actually a good movie too.
yeah, because I love the Fantastic Four and I love that character. And Michael B. Jordan could be a good Johnny Storm, but the character's written as sort of like this hateful, spiteful little twerp and was not fun to watch at all.
Right.
And
Yeah, they
and
go ahead and
unfortunately,
cast a black guy in that role, and then they make him thoroughly unlikable.
well, every character in that movie was unlikable. In fairness, I don't think we need to single him out, but there's not a single redeeming value to that movie at all. But here's the thing: there was, in a weird sort of proto parallel to the backlash that John Boyega received when he was cast in Star Wars, a very racist backlash online, which I was at the time. Oh, I was profoundly against. I don't think he should be casted as him, but don't be racist, guys. That was the height of my hypocrisy. And it was so stupid because the makers of the film, for all the terrible decisions they made, casting Michael B. Jordan as his character was not one of them, not even by a long shot. And it's just so bizarre that happened, and that was so weird and so crap when Black Panther turned up the very next year in Civil War.
Wait, in Civil War with itself?
No, the movie Avengers.
I was just gonna say in the Avengers movie, right?
Sorry, yeah.
I'm like, wait.
He turned up in the Guns N' Roses song "Civil War." That's where he first really made his debut. No,
I was like, wait, was that a film or was that a okay? No.
And we talked about that earlier on the show and the impact he had in those first proto moments. But it was interesting because there was so much going on in this movie, but yet the filmmaker still made time to include personal growth and development for this entirely brand spanking new character, at least when the Marvel Cinematic Universe is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
To talk about him dealing with the death of his father, the future of his nation, and bringing the person, or at least the person he thinks is responsible, to justice. And they focus on that quite a lot in the movie, and it's amazing that the movie is so well balanced as it is because there's so much going on. But it's important that they found time for that, and they recognized that, and they gave Black Panther his due. They could have minimized the role and say, "Oh, we'll expand upon him in his solo movie." They didn't do that. They recognized how important he was as a character, not just to the MCU as a whole, but to that movie, to that story, and to indeed his own personal narrative, and how he needed to be represented as such. And I think that was the changing moment. I'm not saying all black representation is great right now, even all black superhero representation is good right now, but I think that was the point, because from that point on, because I mean, the very next year we got the Power Rangers reboot, remake, live action like it was a cartoon, sort of thing, where the Blue Ranger, who in the original version was a white guy, is now not only a black young man, but he's also autistic.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
And they portray that autism very well, I thought, in the movie. I'm not going to pretend like I have any great insight. Like, I know people, I have friends who are autistic or are on the spectrum in some way, because not every autistic person is the same, obviously. But I did think it was a fairly good portrayal. Maybe some people might disagree with me, I don't know. But it's like, I could not think of a single other black person, or indeed person of color, with that sort of mental issue. I don't call it a mental health issue, because it's not really a mental health issue, but it is a mental thing.
It's a form of neurodivergence.
Exactly, that's the word I was looking for. Neurodivergent. Thank you. Yes.
Oh, I like that. I just learned something today.
Yeah, because people talk about how people who are not on the spectrum are quote unquote normal.
Right.
But they're not normal. They're neurotypical.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
That I
people
heard-
who
I
are
heard that.
on the spectrum. Exactly. So people who are not neurotypical are not sick. They're just divergent from what is typical.
Love.
And vice versa, people who are neurotypical aren't always particularly healthy. Case in
Oh
point,
yeah.
Tucker Carlson is neurotypical. So
I was about to raise my own hand, but yeah, let's use Tucker Carlson.
like that man mentally, he's not fine, but he's neurotypical. That's the point I'm trying to make. But I just thought that was so important because
Mm,
not just to have him as a main character, have him as a Power Ranger. And it's such an important piece of representation, but also I think it's important because, like you were saying earlier, because the way people of color are treated within healthcare, within social care, and things like that, to portray that sort of thing in such an authentic, but also in a positive way, is really important.
mm. And again, it's also, it's not even just about how neurotypical people are now starting to look at neurodivergent people differently. It goes back to that question that we were raising before about how neurodivergent people can see themselves being portrayed in a way that doesn't pathologize them and
Mm.
make them into a problem. Because every time we would watch an episode of a television show or a movie and you see somebody who was on the spectrum, they were always like the problem. And so to see a Power Ranger, somebody who's out there saving people, then a neurodivergent person doesn't have to constantly look at themselves as somebody who is an issue.
Because he's fine in the movie. He's got stuff he's got to deal with, the same as the rest of them, but he's fine. And
Mm,
he's clearly and explicitly and emphatically autistic, but that's not the sole thing that defines him. He's so much more than that, but nor is that ignored or overlooked. It's I would argue that it's a template for how to write that sort of character. I hesitate to say that slightly because, like I said, no, not all autistic people are the same. It's a spectrum, and
mm,
so not one does not represent all. But
mm.
I think that aspect is really important. And in the same year, we get Thor Ragnarok with Valkyrie. She plays Brunhilde. Tessa Thompson plays Brunhilde, the Norse Valkyrie,
Mm.
the archetypical Aryan icon, and she's a black woman. How fantastic is that?
But I love that idea because how long have we, I mean, remember when that Egyptian Gods movie came out and
Oh
Oh
my
Gerard
shit!
god.
Butler was playing fucking
Yeah,
I mean, how long have we had that bullshit going on? So when I see people getting upset that a Norse character cannot be played by an African person, I'm like, but you had Norse people playing the Africans. Like
if you can get Nikolai Coster-Waldau, possibly the most European name in existence, to play Horus, god of light or whatever, of Egypt, you can get Tessa Thompson to play fucking Valkyrie, and that
Hmm.
movie was just so much better than Gods of Egypt and all that
Oh my
shit.
god, it's so much
And
fun. She was awesome.
uh,
she was awesome, and she's going to continue to be awesome. I believe she's going to make an appearance in Thor: God of Thunder. If she doesn't, I'll be fucking annoyed. And it's so cool to see this character. And also, again, she was a side character, but they focus on her struggles and her pain. And sometimes that's done for comedic effect, other times it's done quite seriously. And other times she's on top of a fucking Pegasus, and that makes me feel things deep inside.
Yeah, the scene with the cannon.
What's that?
The scene with the cannon, that was a good scene.
She's all good. She's awesome in it, and it's that sort of thing. Because again, minor character, and I don't think anyone would have cared. No one would have been up in arms and said, "Oh, we needed a person of color to play this character" if she had been played by a white person. But so there was no great pressure for the filmmakers to do that. Taika Waititi did not have to do it. But of course he's going to do it because he's Taika Waititi. Are you going to say no to Taika Waititi? I think not.
Right.
And this all sort of accumulated in one of the best superhero films ever made, indeed one of my favorite films that I've ever seen, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
The one with
Oh yeah, that was a good
Milo
one.
Morales.
Exactly. Yes. Now I talked about Miles Morales before, indeed, when we were discussing Archit, the black superheroes and stuff. Miles Morales came up, and I spoke about him at length. So I'm not going to try not to repeat myself and talk about him in the wider context of this movie, because people have been asking for a movie or something relating to him for years, ever since he first came out in Ultimate Comics, when he was the replacement for White Peter Parker, who died, and he was the new Spider-Man. And there was a lot of backlash back then too, and eventually got to the point where Stan Lee, the OG, the Generalissimo himself, had to come out and say, guys, I love this character. I love the fact that he's black and Hispanic and his last name is Morales. I think that's important. I think that's good. I think that's needed, because Stan Lee understood that. Even back in the 60s, Stan Lee understood the negative impact racism can have, and how that kind of representation for people of color was necessary. And it wasn't always perfect and wasn't always great, but he pushed for that, and he did try for that, and he spoke out against it. Oftentimes he had like Stan's soapbox on the comics, and sometimes that sort of thing would get up, and he would always speak out against it. And to see him in this movie, one of his last film performances, where he hands the costume from in a costume shop over to Miles and say, I'm going to miss the Spider-Man of this universe that has died. We were friends, and Miles asks regarding the costume, does it fit? And Stanley says to him, it always fits, eventually. And he looks at him. It's sort of played by a joke when you see the sign that says no refunds. But I honestly think the filmmaker's intention for that movie was like Stan Lee, not that, Miles needed it, but Stan Lee giving his blessing to Miles, saying that he could be Spider-Man, this black Hispanic kid from New York could be Spider-Man, because Spider-Man is more than skin color. Spider-Man is more than who you are, what you look like, where you're from. Spider-Man is something that anyone who's willing to take up a stand and fight for what's necessary could be. But nor should that be counted, because, as I mentioned when we were talking about those black superheroes, we talk about War Machine and how he was Iron Man for a while, and how he once asked Mr. Fantastic if he was surprised there was a black man underneath the armor. Mr. Fantastic just said, I never gave it much thought. I knew there was a man underneath it. It's that sort of thing.
Oh, damn.
I keep on using this word, but it's the only word I can think of. By fucking thesaurus. It's so important.
It's crucial.
Thank you. Yes, it's crucial. Can you believe I have 2 degrees relating to writing? I know. I need to watch Dead Poets Society again. That's thing he's talking about all the different words. And yet the subject of race and stuff doesn't get brought up a lot in the movie, but a lot of it is subtext, because his father is black, but he's also a police officer,
Right.
and he doesn't like the fact that Spider-Man is a vigilante. And there's so much to unpack there. The relationship between him and his dad is focused on. The relationship between him and his uncle, who is actually, it turns out, he's a supervillain, despite the fact that he has a much closer relationship with his uncle than his father, and his uncle ended up sacrificing himself to save him. And the film ends with a little montage about all the characters, where are they now, and it ends with Miles and his dad putting up a mural for his deceased uncle, like rest in Uncle Aaron, rest in power, which I understand is a lot of things that a lot of people, a lot of Americans say, particularly when it comes to African American people who have been murdered, whether it be by police or just by violence in general. And rest in power. That that's an important. God fucking hell, it's crucial. It's a crucial,
Vital,
vital,
essential.
necessary. It's an impactful thing.
Yeah.
Especially because also it's interesting as well because Mars is the crux of the movie is Mars is moving away from his home and his school, which is to a much more elite, much more private, much more upper class kind of school with a uniform and everything. And maybe I need to rewatch the movie or anything or something. But I remember looking at vaguely just recalling looking back at the movie and thinking, not a lot of other black people in that school. Now I'm thinking about it. I think his roommate, like in his dorm, was Asian, but beyond that, like again, this is just going off my memory. I need to double check this.
Yeah, because Miles was a scholarship student, so he was able to go to a private school that wasn't in his neighborhood. So that was the whole thing too, where you see in the morning where he has kind of a longer commute to school, and he sees some of the kids from his neighborhood who he's friends with getting onto their regular school bus for the public school, which is in that neighborhood. But that public school, because they're in a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood, is probably severely underfunded, and just the educational standards aren't as good. Whereas the private school that he was lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to, they've got all the facilities, computers, all kinds of stuff, and predominantly white because who's got most of the money.
Yeah, and what a surprise! The main villain of the movie is a white guy who's trying to bend the laws of space and time to suit his own whims and needs, hang the consequences. I mean, I'm sure that's kind of incidental, and that's not really what Lord and Miller were thinking of when they made the movie. But I mean, it's a big thing, and it ties into these themes of family and community because when it turns out Spider-Man has died in this world, everyone starts wearing the Spider-Man masks, and it's giving you a sense of unity. And there's other Spider people from other worlds.
Yeah.
Only one of whom is another person of color. There's another Asian character. I say Asian; she's more of an anime character, that sort of thing. But it's there's a lot to unpack there. And again, the last fucking time, a much smarter person than I could unpack that. But to say that Miles Morales has had an impact is the understatement of the fucking century, because it's gotten to the point where now we're getting a standalone Spider-Man. Well, not quite a standalone; it's a spin-off from the previous Spider-Man game, but it's on its own Spider-Man video game with Miles Morales as the character. Finally, we can play as Miles Morales. We can play like a few other things, like Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3, but that's with a bunch of other heroes. Now it's Miles' turn for center stage in a video game, and that's a huge thing.
And quite frankly, another thing that I really liked about the Miles Morales character is that a lot of the superhero movies feature adults or people who are very close to adulthood, like the Peter Parker character who was like, at the end of high school. But here you have a very young kid. And I don't think, children get enough representation either, because when adults write young people, they tend to write these very one dimensional sort of perceptions of what adults think children do and are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think,
hey, adults, that's so whack. You
Hey,
need to
fellow kid.
chill out. Fresh.
Exactly. Like they're always these bratty people who, they're not very complex human beings when adults write kids, because they when grown-ups forget what it's like, how hard it is to be a kid, right? And they forget how difficult it is to go through those those growing pains, because they think that all you have to do really is just do your chores and do your homework, stay out of trouble, and you don't pay taxes, you don't work, you don't do any of this stuff, so how hard can your life be? And so I would hope that there was some consultation With young people, I doubt that they brought them like actually into the writing room, but I would hope that there was some kind of discussion by writers, directors, producers with their own children or with children in their own lives, just to like to ask them like, bruh, what's it like to be, the new kid in school? What, like, really tell me, because kids
and
really, they get the short end of the stick as well when it comes to that.
Mm-hmm.
because I mean, this resonated with me actually quite a lot. You when you mentioned that, it reminded me because um, I'm from an RAF family, an Air Force family, so my childhood until the age of 11, we were moving all the time. So I was every year or so, I was the new kid in school, and
Oh, Archit and I know this.
Yeah,
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 well, yeah,
you're
again, you
preaching to the
guys know
choir
probably
right now.
more than I do. And so it, it's weird. It's not nice being the new kid. Everyone already knows everyone. You don't know anyone. You don't know how anything works, and you don't want
Mm.
to ask questions because
Yeah, the
you
older
don't want
you
to look
get, the
you don't want to look
weirder
weak
it
in front of the other
Because you don't
inmates.
want to embarrass yourself by showing your ignorance.
Yeah, and they sort of represented that. It's not exactly focused on, but it's definitely there for Miles. And God, I empathise with him a lot during that.
Mm.
And that's what we're really talking about here right now. It's the whole reason why we have to talk about all of these, be it representation, Chadwick Boseman, and the protests and the backlash against them, is there is a distinct lack of empathy in our
Mm.
society. And when you have such great representation like Miles, you can empathize much harder. And when you have kind of shitty representation, it becomes a little bit harder, or at least more frustrating for a lot of people. And that you just people just need
Yeah.
to. I hate to say, oh, people just need to like give peace a chance, man. It I don't want to be that kind of wanker. But you empathy, it's sometimes it's hard, sometimes it's effort, it's so easy, and I fall into that trap many times. It's easy to be dismissive, it's easy to be critical, it's easy to be negative. Hard is being empathetic, hard is sympathizing with someone, hard is listening to someone even if you end up not agreeing, and so many people just aren't willing to do that.
But part of the reason why it is so difficult to arrive at that point, and I think this is something that really bears keeping in mind, is that we don't want to own up to the fact that a lot of the ways that we were taught, brought up, and indoctrinated by people that we genuinely love, our parents, our communities, our churches, our schools, right? People we genuinely respect and look up to. We don't want to hold their feet to the fire because we don't want to sort of sound combative, or we don't want to make it sound like, we don't want to say to our moms and dads and teachers and preachers, you guys kind of dropped the ball, and you guys kind of taught me some really really shitty stuff that now I have to unlearn, because we don't want to make it sound like we're ungrateful for the good things that they did and the genuine love that they had, right? So we don't want to turn the mirror on the people that we love, because we don't want to admit to ourselves, not just to them, to their face, but we don't want to admit to ourselves that our moms and dads failed us in certain ways, right?
The
And
amount
we
of
also,
times I've nearly had an argument with my dad over stuff like that.
oh, the amount of times I have had arguments with my, ooh, explosive ones too. But we
Yeah,
also
I'm
don't want
repressed. That's part of the problems.
to.
We're all
But,
repressed in my family.
ooh, you're very British, I guess.
Yeah, I'm surprised that
But
hasn't come
also,
across before now.
part of the reason of that as well is we don't want to turn the mirror on ourselves and analyze all of the ways in which we hurt people that we didn't know and hurt people that we did know, because I know one of the hardest things for me personally is to admit that 10 years ago I had some, not hostile, not violent, but now that I look at them, quite openly um transphobic views, right? And it wasn't because I didn't want to tolerate transphobic people, gender people. It's not because I wanted people to be put in conversion therapy. It's not because I thought it was sinful, but I had my own notions of like what gender is and what it isn't. And it just the idea that a person would identify as a gender of a whatever variety because they felt it inside didn't make sense to me. And so I had to confront my own bullshit and
Mhm.
say, like, who am I to explain somebody else's lived experience to them when I've literally no clue what it feels like? Right?
Because when we grow up in a framework of thinking of the way the world is a certain thing, but that framework deliberately overlooks, ignores, or in some cases contradicts real world things like trans people merely existing or the hardships that uh, black communities go through and the lack of representation in the media and all that sort of stuff. It's a hard thing to confront because much like with Chadwick Boseman's death, we think the world is one way and then it turns out the world is another, and it's a hard thing to confront for everyone. I confronted it with Fantastic Four. You confronted it that way. We all have to do it, and it's part of growing up. And it's the people who
Mm,
don't confront it or refuse to confront it or run away or pretend like it doesn't exist. They're the people who don't grow up, the people who remain in this fantasy land where racism is a thing of the past. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Where people are either born a man or a woman, and that's it. And that,
mm.
oh, you're not gay, you just haven't met the right person yet. That
All
bullshit.
right.
It's
Uh,
it it's all those like it takes many forms, but it's the same thing. Systemic bigotry in our society, and it it's hard to confront, but the thing that gets me angry is we shouldn't have to confront it. It should be explained to us. Because again, like I say, whether it could be schools, parents, churches, whatever, when we're growing up, especially, we trust those institutions to tell us about the world and guide us along the right path. Maybe we criticize or question it here and there, but there isn't that element of trust. And we find out as adults, well into our 20s or 30s or even 40s, that the world we thought we were living is in fact not the world. That is
mm,
it, that's a lie. It's then that sort of trust is gone. And I mean, I was when I was a teenager, I was not rebellious. I was about as rebellious as I could be, you know. And I what I rebelled is I rebelled against the notion of religion. I rebelled against the notion of heteronormatively, hesitantly. I was less vocal about it when I was a teenager because, again, being in a English secondary school at that time, you mention that you were in any way supportive of the gay community, and you're basically marked for death socially.
yeah. Yeah.
It was an impossible thing to get, and I even because here's the thing, I even rebelled against the drinking culture because when I was 16, everyone was getting drunk, and I was just like, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm a rebel. That was the bizarre logic I was operating on.
You just wanted to be a contrarian.
Kind of, yeah. But here's the thing. And then I was like, okay, so 16 years old, you know, religion is bullshit. Gay people are okay. I just won't mention it. And I'm not going to drink anything. I think I've got the world pretty sussed out. Boy, was I fucking wrong. And here's the thing. I'm of the opinion that we never stop growing. We never stop learning. It doesn't matter whether you're 9, 19, or 99. We
Mm,
never stop learning. That's what makes us human. Because and if you close us up after that, you might as well be dead because you're not going to improve as a human being because you refuse to take in any new information.
exactly.
And
Exactly. Sorry,
so
go
go
on.
on.
No, I was also gonna say sometimes you also need to look at the fact that like not only are you perpetuating like dangerous, but like sometimes you need to like confront the fact that you're projecting your own stuff on other people.
Hmm.
So, for example, there's this concept that people call lateral whorephobia, where basically you shame, particularly, women do this, but also women do this to each other, but also like men do it to women, where you shame people for doing literally the same thing you are doing, but differently
Yeah.
because if I'm looking at, say, somebody like, again, 10 years ago, I was looking at somebody like Megan Fox and Nicki Minaj, and I didn't think very highly of them, and I didn't speak very highly of them because I was like, all they're doing is selling this and they're doing that, blah, blah, blah. They have no, and I was like, well, I'm not exactly like a virgin myself. You know what I'm saying? I had a good solid hoe phase at some point. Like, I wasn't exactly like, I wasn't exactly living a biblical, life. So I was doing stuff that maybe somebody else might look at and think, well, that's morally impure, that's wrong, that's whorish or whatever. But I didn't think of myself as doing anything wrong. I thought of myself as being sexually liberated. That other bitch who was hoeing differently from how I was hoeing was the hoe, not me. Like,
I'm
you know
just
what I'm
imagining
saying?
you with a garden implement right now, doing like furrows in the soil. Like that's where my mind is going, and that's where I shall stay in blissful ignorance. But you're absolutely right, because here's the thing. People say like the hardest thing to discover is that your parents or adults are not perfect, and that's
Mm,
true. But I think the real hardest thing is discovering that you're not perfect, that we're not perfect, that we have these biases, some of which might be our faults and which might not be, either perpetuated by other people or by ourselves. But you have to confront them. You have to, but you can't just
mm,
do that just by yourself. Like when I was confronting my, let's call it what they were, racist biases when it comes to the casting of Michael B. Jordan, I tried to do it alone. I tried to do it in a vacuum. I went over
oh,
and over,
yeah.
actually for months, thinking about it. And so there's repetitive loop, like, okay, but it's okay because of this, or it's not okay because of that. And I eventually just realized I got to just listen to other people, and that's when I just I opened myself up to other points of view and listened to other people, and what they were saying made sense, and it made me think not just about this film, because I thought it was just about this film and just about this character and just about this actor. It was about me and my own biases and my own
Mm,
prejudices, and that's what people need to, and that is so hard. I'm not saying that it's easy and that anyone can do it. It is incredibly hard, especially when you live in this society and in this system.
mm,
It's the hardest thing to do, but it's so worth it. Not just for recognizing the world as it is, not just for the people that you could potentially hurt with these negative thoughts and feelings, but also for yourself. I didn't want to be a person who said that people should be limited based on the color of their skin. I didn't
mm,
want to be that person, and I still don't. And I am still checking myself doing this job, and my day to day life. I constantly check myself for these things because I don't want to hurt anyone, and I don't,
mm,
worse than that, I don't want to influence anyone to hurt. Because here's the thing: I have a platform, and it is small. It's very small, but it's still a platform. People listen to me. Believe it or not, people listen to the show. I know. What are they thinking? But that carries in itself a huge responsibility. I don't care whether you're a news anchor or you're just doing a podcast where you're listened by two people, one of whom is your mum. I don't care. You have a responsibility to rid yourself of these prejudices and these biases. And as human, we are naturally prejudiced and biases. And in fairness, I'm never going to let go of my Disney prejudice. That stays until the day I die. I crusade against that until I'm 90. But at the same time, like I said, you have to learn, you have to grow, and have to develop. Like, uh, and that's just not just us. That's our systems, our governments, our police, our social programs, and yes, representation in the media. Look at what we're talking about. We started off with fucking Steel and Spawn and ended on Spider-Man. That that
It was-
that's the journey we as a society need to take.
and not just any Spider-Man, some scrawny like kid. We started off with these people who are like the representation of like, of masculine heroicism to a
Hmm.
kid moving to a new school.
Yeah, and because it's because that you don't need to be the big muscular Shaquille O'Neal. I know, weird to say, to be the hero. I mean, that you can be, But that's the thing. Even that comes with its own sort of things because big black men are seen inherently as a threat by the police in America and other parts of the world, and
Mm,
that in itself is wrong. So there is so believe it or not, yeah, there is value in steel and to a lesser extent spawn. Yeah. So, but there is still we need that sense of forward progression. But you know what? That starts at home. It starts with you, and I know the kids at home are good people. I know I'm listened by good people, but you know, when I was 16 years old and I was a kid, I was a good person, but I still have those biases and still have those prejudices, and we have to work on ourselves. We have to
mm,
because otherwise we stagnate and we become a pond within a pond, as it were.
yeah, yeah.
And we do that by remembering that no man is an island. That we just get out there and listen to people. And I'm not saying you have to agree with everyone. I'm not saying that everyone's opinion is valid. Oh, we lost Archit for a second there.
Oh,
Oh, he's
hello.
Hello?
And
okay. We
there
lost you
you
for a
go.
second there. Phew. I'm not saying that everyone's opinion is valid. I'm just saying you have to get out of your bubble, and it's hard because it's lovely and safe and warm in the bubble.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing about that. Growth never happens in your comfort zone.
And and you know what a great example of that would be? Chadwick
What?
Boseman
What?
in Black Panther. In Civil War initially, he starts off on this quest of vengeance, but he grows. Even though
Oh,
he's a side character,
Hmm.
he grows and he turns into a quest of justice, and which continues on into Black Panther. He's trying to uphold this legacy, but at the same time remembering that before he can become a good king, he needs to be a good person. Chadwick
mm.
Boseman embodied that in such a way, and that's why those films are so important. There's so many other different elements to that, but it's because of him and the way he did that. And I
Um,
said it before, and I'll say it again. This is why he needs to be not necessarily the first because of the people before him, but he needs to be the first of many. This needs to continue. It can't just end with him because anyone can be Spider-Man, anyone can be a superhero, and anyone can be a king. It doesn't matter what you look like.
but an idea that people have been floating around, and I mean, they've been really pushing it lately, but I've heard people floating this for a while now, even before the death of Chadwick Boseman, was the idea that to continue the storyline, right, of Black Panther, if
Hmm.
there's going to be another one, it would make sense if then Zuri
Yeah.
was given the chance to ascend the throne. And yes, everybody has a right to contest that ascension, and everybody has to go through that ritual where you have to fight for the position. So she would also have to do whatever and maybe
Hmm.
she could use her technological prowess to do that because she's the brains, not the brawn necessarily. But, you know, but the idea is in the real world right now, if the queen were to abdicate the throne or whatever, something should happen to her son would have a claim, right? So people are saying if you want to make it a realistic thing, instead of just having him replaced with another male Black Panther, just have Zuri find a way to, yes, be challenged, be contested, but ascend the throne.
Yep.
Because as excited as young Black boys were to see themselves represented as leaders, as kings, and as good people, we also want that opportunity to have the opportunity where we're queens in our own rights, not queen consorts and queen mothers, but where we are queens who ascend the throne through this
Hmm.
through this lineage, and not necessarily through marriage. And so I and also the fact that she's again a young person would be really cool too, because when you look at a lot of different monarchies throughout the world, sometimes it did happen that a young person of 17 or 18 was now given this massive responsibility. But because they had been sort of raised within that environment, right? And they were raised to use maybe their own set of skills to lead, then they could take on that role and use their own special gifts, right? Like I said, she's the brains, not the brawn. So maybe she will lead the country in a new direction. But I really would like that because, if I had a 16 or a 17, 18-year-old daughter right now, I would want her to be able to see a queen who rules as a sovereign in a successful African nation and uses her unique skills to do so.
I mean, there's only one thing really I can say to that. Hail to the Queen.
Hell yeah.
Long
yeah.
live the queen,
Hell
eh?
yeah. And I mean, to be honest, there's a very good chance that they will go in that direction because they've done that in the comics before where, T'Challa died. I mean, they later on, obviously, it's comics being comics, they brought him back, but he was supposedly dead for a while. And so she did actually do all of what you just said. Is she participated in the challenge, drank the heart-shaped herb, and did the fight and won. Took on the mantle of the
What?
Black Panther. Yeah, she did all of that. You got to read the comics, man.
I gotta start doing this.
The
Oh
comics
my
are so
god.
good. Yeah, all of the just like all of them, back to like the 80s and everything, all the way up to now. Because there was actually a recent run that was even written by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So like the Black Panther comics are awesome.
Oh my god.
So we've given you a couple of recommendations there. And here's the thing. Right now, what we need to do is, the US as a nation and comic book fans and sadly his family have to mourn and grieve. And we're sad now. And we need to process that and deal with that and be sad. But that doesn't mean that the future can't be bright. I know I would like to see everything you just said. I hope that is a direction go. But even if they don't, even if they retire the character completely, or even if they do recast him with another male actor, or if we get a new person in, it doesn't. The enduring legacy of this character will remain, and I think that's what we need to hold on to, and it's learn from that and take it forward, pay it forward, and and in doing that, then we might see some real positive change. And on that note, I think we're going to end the show. Thank you very much, Archit and Mindy, for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for inviting me back.
And if you enjoyed the show, Capers, please tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops. If you haven't already, go back into some of our other super episodes, like the Black Lives Matter episodes we've done before. You know what? We'll keep doing these things as long as there is a need for them. Just accept that. You can listen to the show on iTunes, Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, or at podcapes.com. If you want to get in touch with us, suggest show topics, or maybe come on the show yourself, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at AP2HYC. Thank you very much to Dan Harris for our logo, the lovely microphone, the red and blue 3D glasses. Those are mine. And thank you for listening. This has been Podcapers, the official podcast of a place to hang your cape. Cue the music.